The man standing in the shade of the rubber trees, with coins of sunshine dancing on his body, holding her daughter in his arms, glanced up and caught Amu's gaze. Centuries telescoped into one evanescent moment. History was wrong-footed, caught off guard, sloughed off like an old snakeskin, its marks, its scars, its wounds from old wars, and the walking backwards days all fell away. In its absence, it left an aura, a palpable shimmering that was as plain to see as the water in a river or the sun in the sky, as plain to feel as the heat on a hot day or the tug of a fish on a taut line, so obvious that no one noticed. In that brief moment, Veluta looked up and saw things that he hadn't seen before, things that had been out of bounds so far, obscured by history's blinkers. Simple things. For instance, he saw that Rahel's mother was a woman. He saw that when he gave her gifts, they no longer needed to be offered flat on the palms of his hands so that she wouldn't have to touch him. He saw, too, that he was not necessarily the only giver of gifts, that she had gifts to give him too. This knowing slid into him cleanly like the sharp edge of a knife, cold and hot at once. It only took a moment. Amu saw that he saw. She looked away. He did too. History's fiends returned to claim them, to rewrap them in its old scarred pelt and drag them back to where they really lived, where the love laws lay down who should be loved, and how much. Amu walked up to the veranda, back into the play, shaking. Veluta looked down at Ambassador S. insect in his arms. He put her down, shaking too. "And look at you," he said, looking at her ridiculous frothy frock. "So beautiful. Getting married?" Rahel lunged at his armpits and tickled him mercilessly. "Ickly, ickly, ickly." "I saw you yesterday," she said. "Where?" Veluta made his voice high and surprised. "Liar," Rahel said. "Liar and pretender. I did see you. You were a communist and had a shirt and a flag, and you ignored me." "Ayukashtam," Veluta said. "Would I do that? You tell me, would Veluta ever do that? It must have been my long-lost twin brother." "Which long-lost twin brother?" "Urumban, silly, the one who lives in Kochi." "Who Urumban?" Then she saw the twinkle. "Liar! You haven't got a twin brother. It wasn't Urumban. It was you." Veluta laughed. He had a lovely laugh that he really meant. "Wasn't me," he said. "I was sick in bed." "See, you're smiling," Rahel said. "That means it was you. Smiling means it was you." "That's only in English," Veluta said. "In Malayalam, my teacher always said that smiling means it wasn't me." It took Rahel a moment to sort that one out. She lunged at him once again. "Ickly, ickly, ickly." Back inside the play, Kochu Maria arrived, short, behind her tall cake. "Kando, Kochu Maria," Mamachi said. "Can you see our Sophie Mol?" "Kandu, Kochama," Kochu Maria said. "I can see her." She smiled at Sophie Mol extra wide. "She has her mother's color," Kochu Maria said. "Papachi's nose," Mamachi insisted. "I don't know about that, but she's very beautiful." "Sundari Kuti. She's a little angel." Little angels were beach-colored and wore bell-bottoms. Little demons were mud-brown in airport ferry frocks with forehead bumps that might turn into horns, with fountains in love-in Tokyos. Kochu Maria took both Sophie Mol's hands in hers, palms upward, raised them to her face and inhaled deeply. "What's she doing?" Sophie Mol wanted to know. "She's the cook," Chaco said. "That's her way of kissing you." "Kissing?" Sophie Mol was unconvinced, but interested. "How marvelous," Margaret Kochuma said. "It's a sort of sniffing." "Do the men and women do it to each other too?" She hadn't meant it to sound quite like that, and she blushed. An embarrassed schoolteacher-shaped hole in the universe. "Oh, all the time," Amu said, and it came out a little louder than the sarcastic mumble that she had intended. "That's how we make babies." Chaco didn't slap her, so she didn't slap him back, but the waiting air grew angry. "I think you owe my wife an apology, Amu," Chaco said, with a protective, proprietal air, hoping that Margaret Kochima wouldn't say, "Ex-wife, Chaco," and wag a rose at him. "Oh, no," Margaret Kochima said. "It was my fault. I never meant it to sound quite like that. What I meant was, it is fascinating to think that—" "It was a perfectly legitimate question," Chaco said. "And I think Amu ought to apologize." "Oh, dear," Margaret Kochima said. In the angry quietness of the play, the blue army in the green heat still watching, Amu walked back to the Plymouth, took out her suitcase, slammed the door, and walked away to her room, her shoulders shining, leaving everybody to wonder where she had learned her effrontery from. And truth be told, it was no small wondering matter, because Amu had not had the kind of education, nor read the sorts of books, nor met the sorts of people that might have influenced her to think the way she did. She was just that sort of animal. "Has she gone?" Mamachi asked the silence around her. "She's gone," Kochu Maria said. "Cut the cake and give everybody a piece." Mamachi looked sightlessly out into the shining afternoon. "Is everyone here?" she asked. "Oor, Kochima," the blue army in the green heat said. "We're all here." Outside the play, Rahel said to Valuta, "We're not here, are we? We're not even playing." "That is exactly right," Valuta said. "We're not even playing. But what I would like to know is, where is our Esta Papi Chapan Kutapen Petermon?" And that became a delighted, breathless, Rumpelstiltskin-like dance among the rubber trees. Amu emerged from the house and called to Rahel. "Rahel, I want you to have your afternoon nap. Come in after you've had your cake." Rahel's heart sank. Afternoon nap. She hated those. Amu went back indoors. Valuta put Rahel down, and she stood forlornly at the edge of the driveway. On the periphery of the play, a nyap looming large and nasty on her horizon. "And please stop being so over-familiar with that man," Baby Kochima said to Rahel. "Over-familiar?" Mamachi said. "Who is it, Chaco? Who's being over-familiar?" "Rahel," Baby Kochima said. "Over-familiar with who?" "With whom," Chaco corrected his mother. "All right, with whom is she being over-familiar?" Mamachi asked. "Your beloved Valuta. Whom else?" Baby Kochima said. And to Chaco, "Ask him where he was yesterday. Let's bell the cat once and for all." "Not now," Chaco said. "What's over-familiar?" Sophie Mol asked Margaret Kochima, who didn't answer. "Valuta? Is Valuta here? Are you here?" Mamachi asked the afternoon. "Oor, Kochima." He stepped through the trees into the play. "Did you find out what it was?" Mamachi asked. "The washer in the foot valve," Valuta said. "I've changed it. It's working now." "Then switch it on," Mamachi said. "The tank is empty." "That man will be our nemesis," Baby Kochima said, not because she was clairvoyant and had had a sudden flash of prophetic vision. Just to get him into trouble. Nobody paid her any attention. "Mark my words," she said bitterly. Rahel put on her sunglasses and looked back into the play. Everything was angry-colored. Sophie Mol, standing behind Margaret Kochima and Chaco, looked as though she ought to be slapped. The green for the day had seeped from the trees. Dark palm leaves were splayed like drooping combs against the monsoon sky. The orange sun slid through their bent, grasping teeth. In the abandoned ornamental garden, Rahel, watched by lolling dwarfs and a forsaken cherub, squatted by the stagnant pond, and watched toads hop from stone to scummy stone. She owned $700 and a gold bangle with snake heads, but baby Kochima had already asked her how much longer she planned to stay, and what she planned to do about Esta. She had no plans. No plans, no locus standi. She looked back at the looming, gabled, house-shaped hole in the universe and imagined living in the silver bowl that baby Kochima had installed on the roof. It looked large enough for people to live in. Certainly, it was bigger than a lot of people's homes. Bigger, for instance, than Cocho Maria's cramped quarters. Rahel returned to contemplating toads. Fat, yellow, from stone to scummy stone. She touched one gently. It moved its eyelids upwards. Nictitating membrane. She remembered she and Esta once spent a whole day saying. She and Esta and Sophie Mol. They were, all three of them, wearing saris, old ones, torn in half that day. Esta was the draping expert. He pleated Sophie Mol's pleats, organized Rahel's palu, and settled his own. They had red bindis on their foreheads. In the process of trying to wash out Amu's forbidden coal, they had smudged it all over their eyes, and on the whole looked like three raccoons trying to pass off as Hindu ladies. It was about a week after Sophie Mol arrived, a week before she died. By then she had performed unfalteringly under the twins' perspicacious scrutiny and had confounded all their expectations. She had, A, informed Chaco that even though he was her real father, she loved him less than Joe, which left him available, even if not inclined, to be the surrogate father of certain two-egg persons greedy for his affection. B, turned down Mamachi's offer that she replace Esther and Rahel as the privileged platter of Mamachi's nightly rat's tail and counter of moles. C, and most important, astutely gauged the prevailing temper and not just rejected, but rejected outright and extremely rudely all of baby Kochima's advances and small seductions. As if this were not enough, she also revealed herself to be human. One day the twins returned from a clandestine trip to the river which had excluded Sophie Mol, and found her in the garden in tears, perched on the highest point of baby Kochima's herb curl, being lonely, as she put it. The next day, Esta and Rahel took her with them to visit Veluta. They visited him in saris, clumping gracelessly through red mud and long grass, and introduced themselves as Mrs. Pilla, Mrs. Ipan, and Mrs. Raja Golpalan. Veluta introduced himself and his paralyzed brother, Kutapan. He greeted them with the utmost courtesy. He addressed them all as Kochima and gave them fresh coconut water to drink. He chatted to them about the weather, the river, the fact that in his opinion coconut trees were getting shorter by the year, as were the ladies in Ayamanem. He introduced them to a surly hen. He showed them his carpentry tools and whittled them each a little wooden spoon. It is only now, these years later, that Rahel with adult hindsight recognized the sweetness of that gesture. A grown man entertaining three raccoons, treating them like real ladies, instinctively colluding in the conspiracy of their fiction, taking care not to decimate it with adult carelessness or affection. It is, after all, so easy to shatter a story, to break a chain of thought, to ruin a fragment of a dream being carried around carefully like a piece of porcelain. To let it be, to travel with it, as Veluta did, is much the harder thing to do. 3 days before the terror, he had let them paint his nails with red Q-Tex that Amu had discarded. That's the way he was the day history visited them in the back veranda. A carpenter with gaudy nails. The posse of touchable policemen had looked at them and laughed. "What's this?" one had said. "AC/DC?" Another lifted his boot with a millipede curled into the ridges of its sole, deep rust brown, a million legs. The last strap of light slipped from the cherub's shoulder. Gloom swallowed the garden, whole, like a python. Lights came on in the house. Rahel could see Esther in his room, sitting on his neat bed. He was looking out through the barred window at the darkness. He couldn't see her, sitting outside in the darkness, looking in at the light. A pair of actors trapped in a recondite play, with no hint of plot or narrative, stumbling through their parts, nursing someone else's sorrow, grieving someone else's grief, unable somehow to change plays, or purchase for a fee some cheap brand of exorcism from a counselor with a fancy degree, who would sit them down and say, in one of many ways, "You're not the sinners, you're the sinned against. You were only children. You had no control. You are the victims, not the perpetrators." It would have helped if they could have made that crossing, if only they could have worn, even temporarily, the tragic hood of victimhood. Then they would have been able to put a face on it and conjure up fury at what had happened, or seek redress, and eventually perhaps exorcise the memories that haunted them. But anger wasn't available to them, and there was no face to put on this other thing that they held in their sticky other hands, like an imaginary orange. There was nowhere to lay it down. It wasn't theirs to give away. It would have to be held, carefully and forever. Esteban and Rahel both knew that there were several perpetrators besides themselves that day, but only one victim. And he had blood-red nails and a brown leaf on his back that made the monsoons come on time. He left behind a hole in the universe through which darkness poured like liquid tar, through which their mother followed without even turning to wave goodbye. She left them behind, spinning in the dark, with no moorings, in a place with no foundation. Hours later, the moon rose and made the gloomy python surrender what it had swallowed. The garden reappeared, regurgitated whole, with Rahel sitting in it. The direction of the breeze changed and brought her the sound of drums, a gift, the promise of a story. "Once upon a time," they said, "there lived—" Rahel lifted her head and listened. On clear nights, the sound of the chenda traveled up to a kilometer from the Ayamenem temple, announcing a Kathakali performance. Rahel went, drawn by the memory of steep roofs and white walls, of brass lamps lit and dark, oiled wood. She went in the hope of meeting an old elephant who wasn't electrocuted on the Kottayam-Cochin highway. She stopped by the kitchen for a coconut. On her way out, she noticed that one of the gauze doors of the factory had come off its hinges and was propped against the doorway. She moved it aside and stepped in. The low cement pickle vats silhouetted in the gloom made the factory floor look like an indoor cemetery for the cylindrical dead. The earthly remains of paradise pickles and preserves. Where long ago, on the day that Sophie Mol came, Ambassador E. Pelvis stirred a pot of scarlet jam and thought 2 thoughts. Where a red, tender mango-shaped secret was pickled, sealed, and put away. It's true, things can change in a day. While the Welcome Home Our Sophie Mol play was being performed in the front veranda, and Kochu Maria distributed cake to a blue army in the green heat, Ambassador E. Pelvis, with a puff of the beige and pointy shoes, pushed open the gauze doors to the dank and pickle-smelling premises of Paradise Pickles. He walked among the giant cement pickle vats to find a place to think in. Usa, the bar nowl, who lived on a blackened beam near the skylight and contributed occasionally to the flavor of certain Paradise products, watched him walk. It was dark inside, lit only by light that filtered through the clotted gauze doors, and a beam of dusty sunlight that Usa didn't use from the skylight. The smell of vinegar and asafoetida stung his nostrils, but Esther was used to it, loved it. The place that he found to think in was between the wall and the black iron cauldron in which a batch of freshly boiled, illegal, banana jam was slowly cooling. The jam was still hot, and on its sticky scarlet surface thick pink froth was dying slowly. Little banana bubbles drowning deep in jam, and nobody to help them. The orange drink, lemon drink man could walk in any minute, catch a coaching Kottayam bus and be there, and Amu would offer him a cup of tea, or pineapple squash perhaps, with ice, yellow in a glass. With a long iron stirrer, Esther stirred the thick, fresh jam. Esther's jam was stirred. Rahel got up to go, for her afternoon nap. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere." "I'm going to Akkara," Esther said, not looking up. "To the history house." Rahel stopped and turned around, and on her heart a drab moth with unusually dense dorsal tufts unfurled its predatory wings. Slow out, slow in. "Why?" Rahel said. "Because anything can happen to anyone," Esther said. "It's best to be prepared." You couldn't argue with that. Nobody went to Kari Sepa's house anymore. Velya Papan claimed to be the last human being to have set eyes on it. He had told the twins the story of his encounter with Kari Sepa's ghost. It happened 2 years ago, he said. He had gone across the river, hunting for a nutmeg tree to make a paste of nutmeg and fresh garlic for Chela, his wife, as she lay dying of tuberculosis. Suddenly he smelled cigar smoke, which he recognized at once because Papachi used to smoke the same brand. Velya Papan whirled around and hurled his sickle at the smell. He pinned the ghost to the trunk of a rubber tree, where, according to Velya Papan, it still remained. A sickled smell that bled clear amber blood and begged for cigars. Velya Papan never found the nutmeg tree and had to buy himself a new sickle, but he had the satisfaction of knowing that his lightning-quick reflexes and his presence of mind had put an end to the bloodthirsty wanderings of a pedophile ghost. As long as no one succumbed to its artifice and unsickled it with a cigar. What Velya Papan, who knew most things, didn't know was that Kari Saipa's house was the history house, whose doors were locked and windows open, that history used the back veranda to negotiate its terms and collect its dues, that default led to dire consequences, that on the day history picked to square its books, Esther would keep the receipt for the dues that Valuta paid. Velya Papan had no idea that Kari Saipa it was who captured dreams and redreamed them, that he plucked them from the minds of the passer-by the way children pick currants from a cake, that the ones he craved most of all, the dreams he loved redreaming, were the tender dreams of two-egg twins. By the time he understood his part in history's plans, it was too late to retrace his steps. He had swept his footprints away himself, crawling backwards with a broom. In the factory, the silence swooped down once more and tightened around the twins, but this time it was a different kind of silence, an old river silence, the silence of fisher people and waxy mermaids. "But communists don't believe in ghosts," Esther said, as though they were continuing a discourse investigating solutions to the ghost problem. Their conversation surfaced and dipped like mountain streams, sometimes audible to other people, sometimes not. "Are we going to become a communist?" Rahel asked. "Might have to." Esther the practical. Distant cake-crumbled voices and approaching blue army footsteps caused the comrades to seal the secret. It was pickled, sealed, and put away. A red, tender mango-shaped secret in a vat, presided over by a Nowell. The red agenda was worked out and agreed upon. Comrade Rahel would go for her afternoon nap, then lie awake until Amu fell asleep. Comrade Esther would find the flag that baby Kochima had been forced to wave and wait for her by the river, and there they would prepare to be prepared. A child's abandoned fairy frock stood stiffly on its own in the middle of Amu's darkened bedroom floor. Outside, the air was alert and bright and hot. Rahel lay next to Amu, wide awake in her matching airport knickers. She could see the pattern of the cross-stitch flowers from the blue cross-stitch counterpane on Amu's cheek. She could hear the blue cross-stitch afternoon. The yellow wasp wasping against the window pane in a dangerous zzz. A disbelieving lizard's blink. High-stepping chickens in the yard. The sound of the sun crinkling the washing. Crisping white bedsheets. Stiffening starch saris. Off-white and gold. And the smell of a cunning Englishman ghost, sickled to a rubber tree, asking courteously for a cigar. Excuse me. You wouldn't happen to have a, cigar, would you? And Esther waiting for her, by the river, under the mangosteen tree that Reverend E. John Ipe had brought home from his visit to Mandalay. What was Esther sitting on? On what they always sat on under the mangosteen tree, something gray and grizzled, covered in moss and lichen, smothered in ferns, something that the earth had claimed, not a log, not a rock. Before she completed the thought, Rahel was up and running, tumbling barefoot through the green heat, followed by a yellow wasp. Comrade Esther was there, under the mangosteen tree, with the red flag planted in the earth beside him, a mobile republic, a twin revolution with a puff. And what was he sitting on? Knock on it, and it made a hollow knocked-on sound. Fingers fought the ferns, moved the stones, cleared the way. There was a sweaty grappling for an edge to hold on to, and a 1, 2, and things can change in a day. It was a boat, a tiny wooden vallum, the boat that Esther sat on and Rahel found, the boat that Amu would use to cross the river, to love by night the man her children loved by day. So old a boat that it had taken root, almost. A gray old boat plant with boat flowers and boat fruit, and underneath a boat-shaped patch of withered grass, dark and dry and cool. But would it do, that little vallum? Was it perhaps too old, too dead? Was Akara too far away for it? 2 egg twins looked out across their river. The Minachal, gray-green, with fish in it, the sky and trees in it, and at night the broken yellow moon in it. The twins could swim like seals, and supervised by Chaco, had crossed the river several times, returning panting and cross-eyed from the effort, with a stone, a twig, or a leaf from the other side as testimony to their feat. But the middle of a respectable river, or the other side, was no place for children to linger, loll, or learn things. Still, swimming across was not the problem. Taking the boat with things in it, so that they could prepare to be prepared, was. They looked across the river with old boat eyes. From where they stood they couldn't see the history house. It was a darkness beyond the swamp, at the heart of the abandoned rubber estate, from which the sound of crickets swelled. Esther and Rahel lifted the little boat and carried it to the water. It looked surprised, like a grizzled fish that had surfaced from the deep, in dire need of sunlight. It needed scraping and cleaning, perhaps, but nothing more. 2 happy hearts soared like colored kites in a sky-blue sky. But then, in a slow green whisper, the river, with fish in it, with the sky and trees in it, bubbled in. Slowly the old boat sank and settled on the 6th step, and a pair of 2 egg twin hearts sank and settled on the step above the 6th. In a while, as though they'd discussed it, though they hadn't, the twins began to wash the boat in the river. When it was clean, they turned it upside down and hoisted it onto their heads, like a combined hat that dripped. Esther uprooted the red flag. A small procession, a flag, a wasp, and a boat on legs, wended its knowledgeable way down the little path through the undergrowth. The path, which ran parallel to the river, led to a little grassy clearing that was hemmed in by huddled trees, coconut, cashew, mango, bilimbi. On the edge of the clearing, with its back to the river, a low hut with walls of orange laterite, plastered with mud, and a thatched roof, nestled close to the ground, as though it was listening to a whispered subterranean secret. The boat on legs approached the hut. The door was ajar. It was dark inside. A black hen appeared in the doorway. She returned indoors, entirely indifferent to boat visits. Veluta wasn't home, nor Velya Pappen, but someone was. A man's voice floated out from inside and echoed around the clearing, making him sound lonely. The shouter was Kappen, Veluta's older brother. He was paralyzed from his chest downwards. Day after day, month after month, while his brother was away and his father went to work, Kappen lay flat on his back and watched his youth saunter past without stopping to say hello. He missed his mother, Cella, who had died in the same corner of the room that he lay in now. She had died a coughing, spitting, aching, phlegmy death. After Cella died, he was moved into her corner. The corner that Kappen imagined was the corner of his home that death had reserved to administer her deathly affairs. One corner for cooking, one for clothes, one for bedding rolls, one for dying in. He assumed, not without reason, that he would be the first in his family to follow in his mother's wake. He would learn otherwise. Soon. Too soon. Unlike Veluta, Kappen was a good, safe paravan. He could neither read nor write. As he lay there on his hard bed, bits of thatch and grit fell onto him from the ceiling and mingled with his sweat. Sometimes ants and other insects fell with it. The twins put the boat down, and the cutter was met with a sudden silence from inside. Kappen wasn't expecting anyone. Esther and Rahel pushed open the door and went in. Small as they were, they had to stoop a little to go in. The wasp waited outside on the lamp. "It's us." The room was dark and clean. It smelled of fish curry and wood smoke. A grown man could stand up straight in the center of the room, but not along its sides. Another low door led to a backyard, where there were more banana trees, beyond which the river glimmered through the foliage. A carpenter's workstation had been erected in the backyard. There were no keys or cupboards to lock. "Ayo, man, Mol! What must you be thinking? That Kutappen's a basket case," an embarrassed, disembodied voice said. It took the twins a while for their eyes to grow accustomed to the dark. Then the darkness dissolved, and Kappen appeared on his bed, a glistening genie in the gloom. The twins squatted on their haunches like professional adult gossips in the Yemenem market. They sat in silence for a while. "Has Chaco Sars Mol come?" Kappen asked. "Must have," Rahel said laconically. "Where is she?" "Who knows? Must be around somewhere. We don't know." "Kutapa, if a vallum leaks, is it very hard to mend?" Esther said. "Shouldn't be," Kappen said. "Depends. Why, whose vallum is leaking?" "Ours. That we found. Do you want to see it?" They went out and returned with a grizzled boat for the paralyzed man to examine. They held it over him like a roof. Water dripped on him. "First we'll have to find the leaks," Kappen said. "Then we'll have to plug them." "Then sandpaper," Esther said. "Then polish." "Then oars," Rahel said. "Then oars," Esther agreed. "Then offity off," Rahel said. "Where to?" Kappen asked. "Just here and there," Esther said airily. "You must be careful," Kappen said. "This river of ours, she isn't always what she pretends to be." "What does she pretend to be?" Rahel asked. "Oh, a little church-going amuma, quiet and clean. Idly appams for breakfast, kanji and mean for lunch, minding her own business, not looking right or left." And she's really a wild thing. I can hear her at night rushing past in the moonlight, always in a hurry. You must be careful of her. And what does she really eat? Really eat? Oh, stew and... He cast about for something English for the evil river to eat. Pineapple slices, Rahel suggested. That's right, pineapple slices and stew. And she drinks. Whiskey. And brandy. And brandy, true. And looks right and left, true. And minds other people's business. Esteban steadied the little boat on the uneven earth floor with a few blocks of wood that he found in Veluta's workstation in the backyard. He gave Rahel a cooking ladle made of a wooden handle stuck through the polished half of a coconut shell. The twins climbed into the vallum and rowed across vast, choppy waters with a tai-tai-taka tai-tai-tom. Veluta returned to see if Kutapan needed anything. From a distance he heard the raucous singing, young voices underlining with delight the scatology. "Hey, Mr. Monkey Man, why's your bum so red? I went for a shit to Madras and scraped it till it bled." Temporarily, for a few happy moments, the orange drink, lemon drink man shut his yellow smile and went away. Fear sank and settled at the bottom of the deep water, sleeping a dog's sleep, ready to rise and murk things at a moment's notice. Veluta smiled when he saw the Marxist flag blooming like a tree outside his doorway. He had to bend low in order to enter his home, a tropical Eskimo. When he saw the children, something clenched inside him, and he couldn't understand it. He saw them every day. He loved them without knowing it. But it was different suddenly, now, after history had slipped up so badly, no fist had clenched inside him before. "Ha!" he said to his young guests. "And who, may I ask, are these fisher people?" "Esta papi chachen, Kutapen, Peter, Mon, Mr. and Mrs. pleased to meet you." Rahel held out her ladle to be shaken in greeting. It was shaken in greeting, hers, then Esta's. "And where, may I ask, are they off to by boat?" "Off to Africa," Rahel shouted. "Stop shouting," Esta said. Veluta walked around the boat. They told him where they had found it. He knocked on the wood and then scraped a little patch clean with his nail. "Good wood," he said. "It sinks," Esta said. "It leaks." "Can you mend it for us, Veluta papi chachen Petermon?" Rahel asked. "We'll see about that," Veluta said. "I don't want you playing any silly games on this river." "We won't, we promise. We'll use it only when you're with us." "First, we'll have to find the leaks," Veluta said. "Then we'll have to plug them," the twins shouted, as though it was the second line of a well-known poem. "How long will it take?" Esta asked. "A day," Veluta said. "A day? I thought you'd say a month." Esta, delirious with joy, jumped on Veluta, wrapped his legs around his waist, and kissed him. He picked the boat up and carried it out. The twins followed, eyes fixed on their boat with unwavering concentration, starving puppies expecting to be fed. Veluta set the boat up for them. The boat that Esta sat on and Rahel found. He showed them how to follow the grain of the wood. He started them off on the sandpapering. When he returned indoors, the black hen followed him, determined to be wherever the boat wasn't. Veluta dipped a thin cotton towel in an earthen pot of water. He squeezed the water out of it, savagely as though it was an unwanted thought, and handed it to Kutapen to wipe the grit off his face and neck. He tried to hate her. She's one of them, he told himself. Just another one of them. He couldn't. She had deep dimples when she smiled. Her eyes were always somewhere else. Madness slunk in through a chink in history. It only took a moment. An hour into the sandpapering, Rahel remembered her afternoon nap, and she was up and running, tumbling through the green afternoon heat, followed by her brother and a yellow wasp, hoping, praying that Amu hadn't woken up and found her gone. That afternoon, Amu traveled upwards through a dream in which a cheerful man with one arm held her close by the light of an oil lamp. He had no other arm with which to fight the shadows that flickered around him on the floor, shadows that only he could see. Ridges of muscle on his stomach rose under his skin like divisions on a slab of chocolate. He held her close by the light of an oil lamp, and he shone as though he had been polished with high-wax body polish. He could do only one thing at a time. If he held her, he couldn't kiss her. If he kissed her, he couldn't see her. If he saw her, he couldn't feel her. She could have touched his body lightly with her fingers and felt his smooth skin turn to goose flesh. She could have let her fingers stray to the base of his flat stomach, carelessly, over those burnished chocolate ridges, and left patterned trails of bumpy goose flesh on his body like flat chalk on a blackboard, like a swathe of breeze in a paddy field, like jet streaks in a blue church sky. She could so easily have done that, but she didn't. He could have touched her too, but he didn't, because in the gloom beyond the oil lamp, in the shadows, there were metal folding chairs arranged in a ring, and on the chairs there were people, with slanting rhinestone sunglasses, watching. They all held polished violins under their chins, the bows poised at identical angles. They all had their legs crossed, left over right, and all their left legs were shivering. Beyond the circle of folding chairs was a beach littered with broken blue glass bottles. The silent waves brought new blue bottles to be broken. There were jagged sounds of glass on glass. On a rock, out at sea, in a shaft of purple light, there was a mahogany and wicker rocking chair, smashed. The sea was black, the spume vomit green. Night's elbows rested on the water, and falling stars glanced off its brittle shards. Moths lit up the sky. There wasn't a moon. He could swim with his one arm, she with her two. His skin was salty, hers too. He left no footprints in sand, no ripples in water, no image in mirrors. She could have touched him with her fingers, but she didn't. They just stood together, still, skin to skin. A powdery-colored breeze lifted her hair and blew it like a rippled shawl around his armless shoulder that ended abruptly like a cliff. Amu flew through her dream on heavy, shuddering wings and stopped to rest just under the skin of it. She had pressed roses from the blue cross-stitched counterpane on her cheek. "She says you should never wake dreaming people suddenly," Rahel said. "She says they could easily have a heart attack." Between them, they decided it would be best to disturb her discreetly rather than wake her suddenly. So they opened drawers, they cleared throats, they whispered loudly, they hummed a little tune. Amu, resting under the skin of her dream, observed them and ached with her love for them. The one-armed man blew out his lamp and walked across the jagged beach, away into the shadows that only he could see. He left no footprints on the shore. The folding chairs were folded, the black sea smoothed, the creased waves ironed, the spume rebottled, the bottle corked. The night postponed till farther notice. Amu opened her eyes. It was a long journey that she made, from the embrace of the one-armed man to her unidentical two-egg twins. "You were having an afternoon mare," her daughter informed her. "It wasn't a mare," Amu said. "It was a dream. Esther thought you were dying." "You looked so sad," Esther said. "I was happy," Amu said, and realized that she had been. "If you're happy in a dream, Amu, does that count?" Esther asked. "Does what count?" "The happiness, does it count?" She knew exactly what he meant, her son with his spoiled puff. Because the truth is that only what counts counts. The simple, unswerving wisdom of children. If you eat fish in a dream, does it count? Does it mean you've eaten fish? The cheerful man without footprints, did he count? Amu groped for her tangerine transistor and switched it on. It played a song from a film called Chamin. It was the story of a poor girl who is forced to marry a fisherman from a neighboring beach, though she loves someone else. When the fisherman finds out about his new wife's old lover, he sets out to sea in his little boat, though he knows that a storm is brewing. It's dark, and the wind rises. A whirlpool spins up from the ocean bed. There is storm music, and the fisherman drowns, sucked to the bottom of the sea in the vortex of the whirlpool. The lovers make a suicide pact, and are found the next morning, washed up on the beach with their arms around each other. So everybody dies, the fisherman, his wife, her lover, and a shark that has no part in the story, but dies anyway. The sea claims them all. In the blue cross-stitched darkness laced with edges of light, with cross-stitched roses on her sleepy cheek, Amu and her twins, one on either side of her, sang softly with the tangerine radio. The song that fisherwomen sang to the sad young bride as they braided her hair and prepared her for her wedding to a man she didn't love. Amu noticed that both her children were covered in a fine dust, like two pieces of lightly sugar-dusted unidentical cake. Rahel had a blonde curl lodged among her black ones, a curl from Veluta's backyard. Amu picked it out. "I've told you before," she said. "I don't want you going to his house. It will only cause trouble." What trouble, she didn't say. She didn't know. Somehow, by not mentioning his name, she knew that she had drawn him into the tousled intimacy of that blue cross-stitch afternoon, and the song from the tangerine transistor. By not mentioning his name, she sensed that a pact had been forged between her dream and the world, and that the midwives of that pact were, or would be, her sawdust-coated two-egg twins. She knew who he was, the god of loss, the god of small things. Of course she did.